Here we are. So, welcome to the Embodiment Podcast today. I'm your host for today. I'm Karin van Maanen, and I'm with Jane Dancey on the show today. Jane Dancey, who's a somatic coach, already tripping on my own words, somatic coach, rites of passage facilitator, somatic yoga therapist, and international yoga teacher trainer with over 15 years experience in supporting women through all stages of life, from puberty to menopause and beyond. So she very much specializes in guiding women in their journey from puberty through menopause, and guiding them towards powerful and transformational passages and rites of passage of their lives. And she's also a passionate advocate of feminine cyclical wisdom and the healing power of mindful movement and embodiment. She's also mother to a teen girl, and Jane and I have done quite a lot of training and work together. So it's really a deep pleasure to have you on the show, Jane.
Thank you, Karin, and what a lovely introduction.
Yeah, really, really cool to speak to you. And I'm curious as to what got you into all this. This is what we usually start the show with. How did you get into yoga, embodiment, and supporting women?
Okay, about 20 years ago. So I must have been in my early 30s, and at that point I was living in London. I worked in television production, very busy kind of lifestyle, and I had grown up really not being into movement. I was the one at school who would say, "Sorry, miss, I've got a cough, I can't do PE." I would try and get out of any of that, and as in my early 20s, I thought people who went to the gym were just a little bit mad, and I would be more likely to be in the pub than the gym. So I just thought it was all a bit uncool and a bit weird, and there was a turning point. I think it was when I'd finished my MA. I studied fashion and did my MA at St Martin's, and I had a time of being unemployed, looking for work, going around with my portfolio looking for work, and during that time I joined a gym. Oh my God. And I started going to the local community gym in Camden, and I started to actually really enjoy it. And I remember going to step classes and thinking, God, this, I feel really good for it. But I also at the same time, I didn't want to tell anyone I was going, and I didn't want anyone to see me in my gym outfit. It just wasn't part of my life. But I had this secret little thing of like, I'm realizing that movement is making me feel much, much better about myself, but also physically. Like from sort of early teens, I'd gone in and out of depression. So this was a sort of a turning point in realizing that movement could have real benefits for me. And at this little local gym in Camden, they had some yoga classes. So I started going along, and I just, one of the first things was I realized that I was in a room full of very nice people. Like, coming from an industry such as television and having studied fashion, they were quite difficult industries to be in. There was a lot of competition. There wasn't much kindness And so to be in an environment such as that had a big impact on me. If I fast forward, I carried on doing that, and then I started. I was working through television, and I started having health issues, and it accumulated in me having an ectopic pregnancy. And it was a huge life-changing moment. I nearly died. Because when you have an ectopic, you can start to hemorrhage. You start hemorrhaging internally. It was such a big shock that it left me feeling very, very fragile, and I couldn't cope with London anymore. And I made this huge big decision to stop with working with television. I quit my job, and I moved out of London, and I moved to Hastings in Sussex, and I found myself there recovering from this operation, and also just the big sort of emotional fallout from that. And I started going much more regularly to yoga, and it was such a resource for me. And I started going to a few weekends with these teachers, and that's when I started my foundation, my British Wheel Foundation. And I remember someone on the foundation saying, "What about doing the teacher training?" And I said, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm not the type of person to be a yoga teacher." But lo and behold, here I am.
Oh, here we are.
So it's been a real journey, and it kind of came from, I do think that, the way that the body works is that we have these little warning systems when we're not looking after ourselves, and they go from, amber, and then if that gets ignored, it goes red, and a big catastrophe happens. And that's how it was with me, because I really, back in those days, I was very disconnected from my body. I didn't pay any attention to my physical body, and very much my menstrual cycle. I wasn't at all connected to that. So yeah, big catastrophe, huge big life change, and here I am, yoga teacher.
Yeah, this is often the way that something made people aware that they weren't in touch with their bodies for whatever reasons, and there's some crisis happened, or some illness, some awareness that something needed to change.
And I was also really aware of, I had this little bubbling of this feeling of I'm sure there's something else out there. I started seeking something, and I've always been a seeker. I'm always, I'm surrounded by books. I love information. I love research. I love finding out about stuff. And previously in television, I worked as a researcher and a producer, but that was very sort of superficial. And I just started having this sort of wanting to discover something else that was a little bit more profound and deeper, and I tried all sorts of different wild and wacky things, and then came to yoga.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. In terms of embodiment, because haven't you sort of similarly got into yoga, similar route you did with the British Wheel of Yoga, which here in the UK is one of the main providers of teacher training. How did you then get into the embodied approach?
Well, at some point after I've been teaching for quite a while, I had started having therapy, and I became very interested and intrigued around psychotherapy, psychology. I hadn't really studied psychology before, so I started reading up a lot about that, and seeing the connections, and wanting more of a connection, the psychology with the movement. And so I actually started studying psychotherapy, and at the same time somehow I became friends with Mark Walsh on Facebook, and I started noticing some of the stuff that he was doing, and I went along to a workshop. So this is years ago in Brighton, and then just got really loved the work, and so I found myself on the Embodied Facilitator course. And it was really interesting because I was doing that at the same time as a psychotherapy course, and also after having quite a few years of therapy. And I realized that these very simple embodiment practices just cut through years of therapy, and what I could find out about myself from a simple practice of walking around the room, but facilitated obviously in a mindful way, I discovered things that I had been going around in circles for years in therapy. So I actually, after 1 year, I gave up the psychotherapy. I found it too academic for me at that point in life. I was a single mom. And I decided to pursue the embodiment, because, studying embodiment, there are all the practices that are built in for self-care, self-awareness. It runs alongside, whereas psychotherapy training kind of breaks you down, grinds you down, and then you have to build yourself back up. Well, that was my experience, and what a lot of friends of mine who've studied that. So I just was not in a place to be able to put myself through that. I had too much on my plate. I had my daughter to look after, and embodiment was there was a kind of a containing and this constant thoughtfulness around how am I in my body, how am I living, how am I in my relationship. So it was kind of life enhancing.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, for me, personally, having had a similar trajectory, it's like therapy can be like opening the can of worms and really going into the can of worms of our personal history, and embodiment seems to say, you've got this can of worms, here's how you can be with it, here's how you can live your life, even though there's some cans of worms going on. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
yeah, well, I think the practices are always I mean, some of the practices are destabilizing to uncover patterns, but alongside there are all the practices like the centering, the self-regulation, the meditation that provides the holding. And in average academic psychotherapy training, my experience is that there is not that.
Yeah, and it may be changing a bit, that the professions are learning from each other. Recent experience with therapy was there was more resourcing being brought in, which I think that's such a great part of yoga and embodiment as well. It tends to offer lots of ways in which we can resource ourselves to recover from these health issues we might have that might bring us to the practice, or whatever other catastrophes life has thrown at us, to recover and heal.
Yeah, absolutely. I did my training about 10 years ago, and I think the therapy world has really changed in the last 10 years. The word trauma is very much more on around. There's much more trauma-informed practices. Embodiment is the word that people are using a lot. So the body is being recognized as a valuable resource and way of exploring oneself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also seems to come into your current focus with your work, which is very much to support women, as I said in the introduction, from puberty, from the menarche, the onset of having periods, female cycles, and then throughout life to post menopause. And there's a lot of disconnect, as I know you and I have talked about. A lot of women, just like men, but in our own way, we disconnect from these natural cycles in our body. There may be a lot of difficulty with hormones, fluctuations, pain around periods, secrecy, shame, all sorts, and then the potential trauma of childbirth. So
and so under researched and not well held within a lot of that is not well held within Western medicine. And I know, like, a lot of my own experiences inform where I take my work, and also birthing a girl and watching her grow up and seeing how I can support her, and in other ways how I just have to let her work it out for herself. If, like, my own daughter really struggled with starting her menstruation cycles. She wasn't ready for it, and there was nothing I could do to well, there were obviously I did lots to hold her in that. I had the wonderful books and resources, and at that point I was running girls groups as well. But there is just that thing of for a lot of girls, the shock and the trauma of, like, suddenly finding blood in your knickers, and then having to deal with that with school and all sorts of things in this, still for a lot, still a very a child's body, but this sign that the body is getting ready for the next stage. A lot to hold, and I think it. Like, when I was growing up, no one spoke to me about menstruation. My mum didn't give me much heads up about it, and I know that that's the case with a lot of women of my generation and older, and even now. And so that was difficult. But now I think it's there are other layers of difficulty around it. And also girls are getting their periods earlier, which makes it hard.
Yeah, I was quite young, and I had some info. And I remember being at my grandmother's, who was very excited. She was like, "Oh, this is wonderful." And I remember her rushing out to the local baker's to get a cake to celebrate. And I feel a bit emotional thinking about it, because I know a lot of women had a very different experience of their first period, and mine was celebrated, which was really special.
How beautiful.
Yeah, and I think often in terms of our particular profession, embodied yoga, with your specialism for women, it can be such a journey to make those practices or do those practices in a way that helps us really appreciate our body, like warts and all, with whatever issues or injuries, histories our bodies have, to find a way to do those practices that bring some joy, some appreciation for the innate wisdom of the body, or in a lot of your work, the wisdom of the female body, and to instill that into to young people, as well as older women that may not have been encouraged to view or be in their bodies in that way. So you've got a lot of different angles on this, from working with girls to perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause. And you do courses on the embodied female pelvis. So often I find your work, because you're a bit of a go-to person in Embodiment Unlimited for embodied work for women and parenting and so on. What's really your view on this, on how embodiment can help us, help girls, help women, help older women to tap into that wisdom of the body?
Let me have a think for a moment. Well, I think it's that thing of simple embodied practices to bring someone back to their body and to befriend the body, and to discover that their body is a resource. It's the best home that they will ever have, and to come to that discovery that actually there is so much joy and pleasure to be found and discovered and cultivated within the body. It makes me think of 4-year-olds who are skipping and jumping down the street, and they are really enjoying the movement and how it is expressed through the body. And I'm generalizing, not every 4-year-old might be like that, but it was very much the experience of watching my daughter and movement and the other kids around her, of like, the body leads, of like, I want to do this and I want to do that. And there is a specific time in her development, and I noticed with a lot of kids, where they just wanted to explore their environment with their body. So it would be like the kid in the cafe who is lying in the sofa and rolling over the arms with his or her body, so that just because it's just that exploring of space and body. And I love that. And that's why as adults we find ourselves going to things like contact improv or 5 rhythms to bring our older bodies that have forgotten that way of expressing joy through movement. And obviously that's a real big leap, because the reality is that there is a lot of people experience a lot of disconnect, a lot of trauma, either psychological or physical pain. So to say, oh yeah, your body's a resource, for a lot of people, they will just go, what do you mean? No, it's not. It's a really unfriendly place, and it's not somewhere where I really want to keep my attention. So I think embodiment has amazing practices to lead someone gently and kindly at the right rhythm towards this journey to where that they might be able to discover that.
Yeah, and I found your work very powerful in that regard. Last year you did quite a lot of work on pleasure when I was coming to some of your classes, and it was all really very gentle and accessible. And maybe it's because I'm from a Dutch Protestant background as well, and all these things affect us. But to have an hour or so a week to focus on the simple pleasure of being a body is so nourishing. And it's hard sometimes to give myself time to do that, to make it a priority. I do think it's incredibly important. And as a mom as well, and a single mom, you mentioned, it's, how can, have you got any advice for parents in that position, or how to kind of keep in touch with that pleasure and self-care as you go along your parenting journey?
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own experience is that pleasure went way off my radar. Pleasure and fun were just not things that I experienced in my body, and were not on my radar. And when I say pleasure, I mean like a very sort of a kind of a more childlike version of pleasure. I'm not diving straight into sexual pleasure, which I think, you know, in a sort of British culture, may, you know, I'm sure there's other parts of Europe that are a bit like that, where we think about pleasure and we think, oh, sex, and it's not that. It's just simple pleasure, like a child experiences pleasure, like an animal experiences pleasure. Because when we think of, like, if we instantly think of sex, then it's just like we've completely bypassed it. Of like, you know, what is, like, how can I experience just a little bit of pleasure? I look out the window and I realize the sky is blue, and I take that in, and I notice a ripple going through my body. Yeah, like sort of, it's oxytocin, it's all the good stuff, and that's so amazing. It lowers inflammation, it boosts us up, it keeps us vital. Yeah, it's one of the ways that we keep ourselves healthy. It's our birthright. So how does someone get there? Well, I think, you know, I think baby steps. That's how I got back into it. I remember a woman years ago saying to me, I've made pleasure my practice. I'm just going to go towards pleasure. And I thought that was so radical. Oh my God, that is so radical. And I thought, right, I'm going to have a go at that. And it was just little baby steps of that, those really simple things, like rubbing one palm on the other palm, and noticing what rhythm feels good, what quality of touch feels nice. And I always start with kind of inane words like nice. What's nice? Because that's it, it's not so charged. What's pleasant?
Yeah.
How can you make it more pleasant? Or could that even be pleasurable? And so it's like finding a way in for people, and what works for one person won't necessarily work for another. So like when I was doing my somatic pleasure sessions, which I loved doing, thank you lockdown for allowing me to go a little bit creative online. It was really like exploring different language and different ways that one can start to access the pleasure that is all around us, potentially.
Yeah. As you were saying this, I did look out the window myself, and if anyone listening has the opportunity to see something pleasant out of their window, taking that in for a few moments and stroking your own hands, they're really simple things, and I guess sometimes we're just so kind of hyper focused on our technology or our sorting out our lives, our problems. We forget these simple pleasures, or as we say in English, we forget to smell the roses.
Absolutely. And you know, it's like, because I do the work around the female pleasure, sexuality, sensuality does come into our explorations. And I do say to my clients is that if I am rushing around as a busy person, as a mum, and kind of not having time to do some practice and meditation, and you know, the rushing woman syndrome, I've heard this phrase, which is really resonates.
Yeah.
Then how do I expect to, when I find myself in a situation, an intimate situation with my partner, how do I expect that I can instantly jump into, oh, this is going to be pleasurable? Or how or do I put an expectation on myself? This should be pleasurable. I need to access pleasure now. If I'm not accessing and noticing and cultivating and getting used to pleasure in my body during the day, it's going to be a lot harder to find it in intimacy as well.
Yeah, and yeah, for me, I've definitely got rushing woman syndrome. I then can also like make it even worse for myself by feeling like a failure, or you know, I'm not good enough, or whatever, berating myself for having rushing woman syndrome. It become
We all do. I mean, we you know, we live in a world that is in perpetual summer. If we go back to the seasonal, cyclical living, you know, in here in Britain, we're in deep winter, but we've just come out of bonkers Christmas and New Year, where everything is going out. We've got to do this, we've got to do that, overload. But in actual fact, we're at that time of like going in, quietening down, journaling by candlelight. If we could sort of live more cyclically, but then there, and if the world if our culture, our environment supported that, then there would be less incidences of rushing women.
yeah.
So, you know, it's really hard to step out of that. You know, like people step out of it, they go and move to Spain and live in a community or live off grid. That sounds wonderful, but it's not a possibility for me. And also I want to live in society, but I also want to explore, and that's the tricky part of like exploring. How can I be in this, but also how can I honor cyclical living, and also what my own cycles that are going on, like with my energy and life cycles. And that's the constant push pull.
Yeah, it takes a really good boundaries, I think, to be able to go against the tide of society, working life, or whatever's going on. To say no, I need to step out because my body tells me to, for whatever reason.
And enter stage left embodiment practices, EYP, you know, embodied yoga principles of like setting boundaries, saying no. I mean, they're so hugely life-changing, useful. I mean, whenever I'm coaching women, a lot of mums, women who are juggling work and kids and all that, what else comes with life, aging parents, to give them the skills in which to create boundaries, but the boundaries that they actually feel in their bodies, and their bodies are believing themselves. Because the thing is like, if I go to CBT or I do mindset such and such, and like, yes, I'm going to say no to that, and I'm going to say yes to that. And it's all in the head. So when it comes to it, I say no, but my body is going, collapsing, because it's a big transition to go from kind of saying yes to everything, or oh maybe, to then saying no. We have to lead ourselves gently through that process of not just head, but heart, stomach, pelvis, legs, the whole shebang, to be able to kindly say thank you, but I'm not going to do that today.
Yeah, life's journey probably for many of us. I was also thinking back to the pleasure idea, and how useful that is to help us to regulate and feel better and generally be healthier, happier. It can be tricky if we're really depleted, suffering maybe from anxiety and depression, to even acknowledge that it might be great that the sun is shining.
Yeah, no, that I really appreciate you saying that, because and I've had my experiences of that at certain points in lockdown, of experiencing anxiety, and really for sort of a very physical representation of anxiety in my body for the first time ever, and then dipping into depression. And if someone had said to me, look at the sky, it's blue, isn't that lovely, I would have probably told them to take a running leap into the lake. So it's finding those little ways of just keeping a few options open, and it might be that I might get pleasure, if I'm feeling like that, I might get pleasure from my hot water bottle, or my favorite scarf, or my favorite blanket, or a certain scent. Just those things that are nourishing and meeting me where I need to be met. And that's a very individual thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and in an embodied way, because we could think, oh, I can get pleasure from binging on Netflix or binging on chocolate, and then maybe afterwards feeling worse. So what you're describing are simple, sensual pleasures in the meaning of through the senses: touch, hearing, what we can see. And that they all seem quite nourishing, like hot water bottles, so finding a way to nourish ourselves in an embodied way.
If that's, and just experimenting. I know also when I'm feeling depleted, or a little bit like my mood is a little bit dull, a little bit depressed. That word depression is so loaded, but of that thing of like, I like to think of like a depression like in weather. It's sort of, I'm a bit monotone. Maybe I don't, my facial, I'm not having loads of facial expression. It's smiling is just not on the cards. I know it's like things are not quite right. For me, one of the things that works is I live quite relatively close to the sea. I go and jump in the sea. And that works for me. Now, for other bit, it works for me at certain times. At other times, it would be the most, it just wouldn't be on the cards, and it would be too much of a leap.
Yeah, unkind, yeah.
So it's really becoming familiar with what works when, and having a sort of a bag of resources, pick a mix.
That sounds very empowering, to kind of go and think, oh, what works for me, having that choice.
Well, we're constantly being told, do this, cold water swimming solves everything. Breathe right, and you know, everything's fine. You'll sort your hormones out, this will be fine. And it's so, that's such a reductionist way of looking at things, because we are unique, each one of us. How I am in the morning will be different to how I am in the afternoon. How I am today is different to how I am tomorrow, because we are cyclical beings. And that's like, you know, I do a lot around perimenopause and menopause, and I'm loath to say that this will fix that. See, I'm not into the idea of fixing, first of all. And also, I prescriptive practices just kind of insults the intelligence and the cycles of the body, because it can be quite random. Hormones can be quite random, so it's checking into rhythms and staying curious.
Yeah, and I was saying this in a session I taught this morning, that to a large extent our nervous system is autonomic, which means it's kind of independent from what we might want or think would be good, and we can influence it to a level. We can create conditions to be healthier and happier, and some stuff we have no control over, or very little direct control, maybe some gentle influence. But a lot of these things are not under our direct control. We're human beings, not robots.
Absolutely. I mean, we can influence them and we can support them, but we can't micromanage them.
No.
It's like, if I micromanage my breath, that's not gonna be helpful. In the same way, if I try and micromanage my daughter,
good luck.
Tell me to get stuff.
Yeah, it's already not working with my 2-year-old toddler granddaughter, let alone a teenage.
Yeah, totally.
Teenager. So I think I just had an interesting thought and it went again. What was it about influencing the nervous system?
I do. One thing that I'm quite interested in right now is how there's a lot of talk about coming back to the parasympathetic, the rest and digest part. And in actual fact, a lot of the time, what can be required and is missed is the fact that we need to complete the cycle of the sympathetic. You know, the activation. It's like sometimes we go into activation and then it gets stuck. And it's that completing the cycle. So whether that's screaming, shouting, doing some hard movement, pushing, flexing muscles, jumping in the cold sea, and also the very, very relevant to women is to have a healthy, to be able to access in a healthy way the sympathetic. So being able to go into the sympathetic of the more yang in a sustainable, positive way of being able to say no.
Yeah, so it's like the pushing. Sympathetic is the kind of fight flight response part of the nervous system. So allowing something to be expressed.
Yeah, because it's almost like the sympathetic part of the nervous system gets a bit of a bad PR job. You know, like we've got to move away from that, got to be parasympathetic, but we need sympathetic. That's what gets things done. And if I think about birthing babies, as a woman dilates, that is parasympathetic. It needs to be parasympathetic. She needs to relax for the cervix to open. But then the pushing, the baby coming out, that is sympathetic. That is like force.
Yeah.
In the same way with sex, the lead up, the arousal is parasympathetic. One has to be, especially for women, those in female bodies, there needs to be relaxation for the body to become aroused, for the tissues to become aroused. But then the orgasm is sympathetic. So there are always the two sides.
Yeah. Oh, I love that point of view. I hadn't really considered it in that way. I remember what I was thinking about. It was kind of about this micromanagement, or thinking we can control the body, and certainly I think it might still be around as a perspective, but certainly in the yoga world, or when I first got into yoga, which was 2002, 2003, and it was maybe my perception more than anything was that I could perhaps micromanage my body, and some of the yoga books will say, oh, if you do this posture, that will cure that, and so on.
If you stand on your head, you'll cure everything.
Yeah.
There's loads of stuff out there, isn't there? And like, if you do this, it will do that. And a lot of it is based not in fact or science. There's a whole body of work that has kind of dismantled those views on yoga in a in a very helpful way. That's not to say that to get rid of, but just to see it in a different light of, I love a yoga teacher that I love to study with is Peter Blackaby. And one of the things he says is when you're doing a yoga posture, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Like, if I'm in triangle pose, why am I putting myself in this sort of strange place? What's it serving?
Yeah.
And like, one of the things he says, you'd never see a horse doing that. That would just be ridiculous. So, like in my early days of yoga, like someone would say, go do this. And I'd be like, oh, okay, well, not doing it quite well enough. And I would just constantly be led by the other person because I didn't know my body. And in the old days, and I think it is very much changing. It was, do this, put your right foot forward, do this with your left hip, and you will feel like this. So there was no potential for my body to come into autonomy, or to start to have that, where would my body go? If my body was leading, where would it go? And it wasn't until coming to embodied practices and jumping into the deep end of 5 rhythms of going, oh, okay, like, it's not going to be led by my brain. If I go with my body, that's completely unknown and quite scary.
Yeah. And Peter Blackaby's been on our podcast, so you can look him up if you're curious about that. And the phrase that comes to mind is that, this yoga that is much more intelligent, which is actually the title of one of his books. And something you've said here as well, to be much more aware of what works for anyone's individual body, to try things out. And it really puts us into the driving seat of our practice, I guess, where we become our own teachers in a way. From knowing about your background and a bit more since this chat, there's so many influences you've brought into your work, lots of different practices, trainings, research and study, and you've come up with this quite unique approach, very focused on the female body. It seems to be like really valuable to stay a learner and to have this mix of influences and input to make our practices as intelligent and sensitive as possible. So I know you're always studying and learning. So what is your latest thing that you're really getting into to bring into your work?
Well, I have taken on another quite diverse training. I do love to give myself a bit of a challenge, and I am a bit of a magpie with things that I find so many different aspects of all of these the holistic world and the science world and mythology and it's all tantalizing and makes me ponder on what I'm doing with my own body and what I'm offering to others. So with that in mind, because I do a lot around perimenopause, menopause and the pelvis, I know I've been looking a lot more at hormones, and that led me to do some studying in kinesiology, which is muscle testing, which I've always been a fan of kinesiology. I've always found it a therapy that's been really useful to balance me. And I've been going for years, and I would be the one on the massage table going, "Oh, how does that work? That's interesting." Oh, you know, it's always kind of I've been fascinated by you know, it brings in the Chinese system, the meridian system, and also loads of other things. So I've started studying that, and I am right down as a beginner. Like learning meridians and all the neurolymphatic points and the all of these different parts of the body, and it's really interesting. You know, I have been giving myself a bit of a hard time because I'm not, you know, I have to be in beginner's mind, obviously, to learn, and I have to accept where I am, that right now I have to keep referring to books and checking and things. But it's a really, it's fascinating. It's very, I can see how it will start to come into other parts of my work, but it's also a very interesting process to take myself through. Because if I go and study, I don't know, like some kind of somatic movement, there is still a familiarity, whereas this is very much out of my comfort zone, which is, I think it's so good to do that.
Yeah, that's where a lot of learning happens, as long as we're not so far out of the comfort zone that we're too stressed. But that great place of learning. So I think we've been talking for nearly an hour. So you've got quite a few things that you do kind of once or twice a year or a few times a year. Anything you've got coming up in terms of supporting yoga teachers?
So I've started running alongside a colleague of mine, Julia Davis of Yoga Teachers Forum. We've started a mentorship program for yoga teachers, and it's based on cyclical wisdom. So it's using the cycles to support oneself and one's work. So that's very exciting. I'm carrying on doing perimenopause yoga that people can join, but also the perimenopause yoga teacher training. And I am creating a new version of my Embodied Female Pelvis course. I haven't run it for a while. And I've been kind of doing my own explorations. So I've had my fallow period of sort of mulling things over, and I'm about to create a new version of that and to bring that out very soon.
And that's all online at the moment, isn't it? So people can access from all over the world.
Yeah, and carrying on with my one-to-one somatic coaching in all of those areas, or whatever arises.
Yeah, amazing. And you can find more about all of Jane's work on janedancey.com. Dancey spelt with an EY at the end. And we'll share that link, of course, in the podcast notes, as we always do. And as we're coming towards a close, do you have like an embodiment tip? You gave us a couple of little practice ideas there, actually, in the middle of the interview, but anything else you'd like to say to the listeners that they could take away?
Perhaps just exactly where you are right now, just noticing how you've how your body has settled into the space that you are, and just see if there's any little adjustments that you could make for a little bit more comfort, a little bit more settling. Is it just a little bit of a repositioning, perhaps a bit of a stretch, a yawn? How can you find maybe even 5%, a bit more ease and comfort? And for me, this is such a profound practice, because a lot of it's a practice to take off the stool, off the mat, and to bring into everyday life, because a lot of the time we bypass this and we place ourselves in a position of just slight discomfort, of like, this is okay, but actually it's not okay. My body's slightly twisted, I'm a little bit holding, my stomach's a bit tight. And I was just like, how in as much as one can in every moment, how can one really allow the animal body to get comfy? Like, my cat is brilliant at this. She is my teacher. And she is my reminder of that. And that's such a profound message to give to your body, that you're looking after body, but also so it becomes wired to put yourself in a comfortable place for body and mind.
Yeah, I love that one. I could do with in that moment with a reminder of that. So thank you so much, Jane. And actually the whole conversation has felt very nourishing to me. And as always, it's great to see you and talk to you. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Karin. It's been a pleasure to chat.